Hello, welcome to the Bird Talk Show. Have we got a great show lined up for you today? Not only is the 24/7 live stream bird feeding station here at the Bird Garden YouTube channel super active, we've got a guest all the way from Louisiana. I can't wait to introduce you to my new friend, Matt Courtman. And what has Matt Courtman been up to? Well, I'm going to let him go into detail explaining that. But in a nutshell, he's looking for the ivory-billed woodpecker. Some call it the Lord God bird. Is it extinct? Some people say yes. Does it exist? Some people say I've seen it. We're going to let Matt talk to us about that. I'm glad you're here today. If this is the type of content you like, go ahead and hit that thumbs up because that tells the algorithm we're doing things right, and we'll be able to make our viewing family a little larger, get some new friends in here. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting on? Go ahead and subscribe so then you can hit the bell icon and get notifications when we upload new content and when we use the community tab. Now, the community tab is very important. You don't have to watch uploaded content, but when I get an update from my new friend Matt Courtman about Ivory-billed going on, I'll upload that as a community post and you can see it if you hit that bell icon. But without further ado, let's see if we can get Matt Courtman in here. Matt, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
We can hear you too. So good to have you on the Bird Talk Show. Matt, let me get you to just introduce yourself to the Bird Garden channel viewers. Go ahead.
Well, Rack, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you. It's one of my favorite topics, and it's our professional life. I'm a former Louisiana Ornithological Society president, and I was very lucky when I was a child. It was discovered that I had a photographic memory. I wasn't a genius. Wow. I just had a photographic memory for patterns. So my second grade teacher really encouraged me, and I ended up taking college courses after my second grade when I was 8, and I scored the highest of all the students on the identification exam, but I couldn't spell prothonotary or semipalmated. The reason I bring that might sound obnoxious, but the reason I bring that up is just to show why I was so lucky to be engaged in the scientific process as a kid. And maybe because, so the big picture with the Ivory-billed woodpecker, for those in your audience who don't know what the Ivory-bill is, the Ivory-billed woodpecker, Rack referred to it as the Lord God bird. And that's because actually you can see over my shoulder, that's the Audubon painting from 1837. So it's called the Lord God bird because the people who first see it exclaim something like, "Oh my God, what a bird. Good Lord, what a bird." So America has 2 large woodpeckers, crow-sized. So the more common pileated woodpecker, and it's pileated or pileated, is similar to the Ivory-bill in looks. The Ivory-bill is slightly larger in dimensions. It's about 21 inches, and the pileated is about 19 inches. But again, both crow-sized, which surprises people that we have woodpeckers that large. But the Ivory-bill is almost twice the weight. And even though they superficially look alike, the Ivory-bill is of a tropical genus of woodpeckers. So it's Campephalus, that's the genus, right? We're Homo sapiens. So the Ivory-bill scientific name is Campephalus principalis. And so there are 11 species of it. And again, it's mostly a tropical genus in the Americas. And the Ivory-bill is the 3rd largest woodpecker in the world. So
significant, no matter how you look at it.
Right, exactly. So the status of one of the things that is confounding to people who say that if the Ivory-bill were out there, people would get photographs and it would be seen. It's always, since European contact, there's some controversy about before European contact and when the great southern pine forests were burned for agricultural purposes. Perhaps prior to that point, the Ivory-bill was a pine specialist, but by the time people started writing about birds in America, it was largely limited to the bottomland, right around rivers and hardwoods. So it was never a common bird after European contact. It could be locally abundant. And so one of the things about the Ivory-bill, as I said, while it looks like a pileated woodpecker, it's completely different in its behavior. Mm-hmm. So one of the things is the morphology, right? The shape of the bird. Its wings are long and thin, and it flies like a duck. because its feeding strategy, it has a more restricted diet, probably.
Okay, now I'm not familiar with those terms when I think of a pileated woodpecker flying.
Right.
I think it has more of an oversized woodpecker, a bit of an undulation.
There you go.
So you're saying it's completely different.
Yeah. And so this is the thing when people say ivory bills are hard. It's hard to distinguish an ivory bill from a pileated. It's not at all hard if you've seen enough woodsmen, people are out in the woods who've seen a few pileateds, exactly what you described, Rack. I'm a pilot, so I'll talk in flight profiles. Okay. The flight profile of an ivory bill is like an arrow. The flight profile of a pileated is like a butterfly, comparatively. So the ivory bill looks like a big duck coming through the woods, whereas the pileated has a lazier flight. And this isn't an insult about the pileated. It is that because, again, not surprisingly, the animals are fitted for what they feed on. So the pileated, it has what we call big boat paddle wings for maneuvering closely in the woods, whereas the ivory bill flies like a duck, straight and forcefully, because it might go 20 miles a day in search of its particularized food, whereas the pileated, because it eats largely carpenter ants, which are more widely distributed throughout the forest, the pileated doesn't have to range as far. So, but really what I want to emphasize to your audience is the controversy with the ivory bill. It was, as I said, never really a very common bird, but ornithology, the study of birds, really didn't exist at least field ornithology as a discipline until 1915 with Arthur Allen's advent of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. And the Cornell Lab remains the preeminent ornithological institution. But the point of the story, Rack, is by the time we had actual ornithologists to do actual science, the ivory bill's numbers were so greatly reduced that we don't have many reliable things about the ivory bill. And so
that explains it.
And so that's what I'm largely fighting against. I've been involved.
Okay, hang on. Let me interrupt you right here, Matt.
Sure.
Let me unpack a few things because we've covered a great distance.
Yes.
All right. You're there in Monroe, Louisiana.
Right.
And this is within the natural range of the Ivory-billed woodpecker for as long as we know.
Yes. It's the heart of the ivory bill's range.
Heart of the ivory bill range. You're right there in it.
Yep.
And you've described several differences. And the reason you did that is because the ivory-billed woodpecker is considered extinct by some.
Right.
We do not think that is the case, and much harm can come if we promote that idea. So we're saying, no, the most common misconception when we say we saw an ivory bill, the go-to is, that was probably a pileated, because those are common and they look superficially alike. But you've outlined several ways. They are in no way alike. And you did some detail on that flight pattern. That is a distinctive field mark for a bird watcher. We identify birds by silhouette if we can see the flight pattern. So knowing that an ivory-billed woodpecker flies like an arrow and a pileated woodpecker flies like a butterfly, you're not going to get those two confused very often. No, there's anomalies. But by and large, those are field marks that we rely on, and at least one piece of evidence when we're trying to get a confirmation on identification, we want to list the flight pattern if that's available to us. So your what Mission Ivorybill is your project. Tell us what is Mission Ivorybill?
There are two prongs of Mission Ivorybill. Okay. So it's important to get the history of the status of the ivory bill. With the and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but after the Civil War and the more efficient northern timber companies came down, I say this is Louisiana. So the great bottomland hardwoods of the South were cut by and large. So fast forward, by 1924, it was thought that the ivory bill was extinct. Now, having said this is another, when I said the Mission Ivorybill is two streams, basically, let me state that and I'll describe it. One is to actually do something that's never been done, which is a systematic search for the ivory-billed woodpecker throughout its range in the southeastern United States. And we'll say that again.
That's significant.
All right, so we'll show you a document later that I sent you about a conclusion. The Ivory Bill, the first thing you need to know about the Ivory Bill is it has a very particular habitat in which it's found and in which we never find bird watchers. That's the deep swamp woods. And so where I've looked and looked for and seen Ivory Bills, I've never seen a bird watcher in there other than people who were searching with us. And I've only once seen somebody I didn't know, right, who wasn't on a search, and that was a hog hunter. So one of the misnomers is people think, well, it's not a question, does the Ivory Bill exist? The question is there proof that the Ivory Bill exists? Because so as a recovering lawyer, which I've talked about before, there's evidence and then there's proof. Certainly eyewitness testimony is evidence. It's evidence that we find in the United States sufficient to execute people, right? I mean, you could be convicted of murder just on eyewitness testimony.
Great point.
I'm not claiming that I've proven the Ivory Bill persists to third parties, right? I have very good audio recordings which match the dynamics. But again, Rack, I'm going to take about 2 minutes to give your audience the history of the Ivory Bill, because this is important. All right, so it was serially declared extinct, but the people who in the deep South woods who hunted, they knew the Ivory Bill wasn't extinct. But so just as a timeline, in 1924, bird was thought to be extinct. And Arthur Allen, whom I mentioned before, who's was a great ornithologist who founded the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Dr. Allen and his wife were led to a pair of Ivory Bills in Florida. And so it was announced that the Ivory Bill's being rediscovered. But again, that's kind of two things. There's the scientific world who doubted the Ivory Bill still existed, and then there's the actual people who were in those woods and they knew the Ivory Bill wasn't extinct. But anyhow, so the Ivory Bill was thought to be extinct in 24 because probably the pair that the Allens had reported about, that pair probably was killed to collect them. So there were two people actually ate Ivory Bills. And as they became more and more rare, they were collected to put in museums, and they were collected by very wealthy people as objects. So 24, that's it. The last pair is killed. So 1932, Mason Spencer, who is famous in Louisiana history because he was a legislator from Tallulah, Louisiana, near us in Northeast Louisiana. Mason Spencer is famous because he was an anti-Huey Long legislator. At any rate, Mason Spencer in 1932 overheard biologists in the Louisiana Department of Conservation, now the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. He heard them say that the Ivory-billed woodpecker was extinct. And Mr. Spencer said, "Are you talking about Kent's?" That's the Ivory Bill makes a sound. It's can't. It's described as such. So country people called Ivory Bills Kent's. So Mason Spencer said to the biologists, "Y'all talking about Kent's?" And they said, "Yes." And Mason Spencer said, "Oh, that's not true. They're not extinct. I see a lot of them where I hunt in Madison Parish, Louisiana, right? We have parishes, not counties, in Northeast Louisiana, in the Singer Tract. And the Singer Tract was called that because it was owned by the Singer Sewing Machine Company that needed wood for its sewing machine boxes. So at any rate, they've not surprisingly didn't believe Mr. Spencer, so they gave him a permit to kill an Ivory Bill. And the reason he would have needed a permit for two reasons. In 1917, there was the Migratory Bird Act treaty, which meant that it was illegal to kill birds that weren't game birds or pests. So there was that. And also the Singer Tract was actually a game preserve. So they gave him a permit to kill an Ivory Bill, thinking he'd come back with a pileated. And very shortly thereafter, he came back and plopped the last known to have been collected Ivory Bill in 1932. So the Ivory Bills still exist, right? And the person who got that news out to the ornithological world was my mentor. I've been so blessed and lucky. George Lowry, Lowry. George Lowry then was a 20-year-old student at Louisiana Tech, and Dr. Lowry later finds the LSU Museum of Natural Science. But just to complete this part of the story, so as a 20-year-old, he gave a talk at the 1934 American Ornithologist Union meeting in Chicago, where the previously mentioned Dr. Allen from Cornell was. So 20-year-old George Lowry announced to the ornithological world that the Ivory-bills existed in Northeast Louisiana. And so then Dr. Allen Cornell had been gifted state-of-the-art movie equipment, both film for filming and audio. So Dr. Allen happened to have a sabbatical coming up the next year, and he had the Cornell expedition. I think it was supported by a man named Brandt. At any rate, the Cornell expedition of 1935 to record the birds of the United States, since they were worried about the Ivory-bill going extinct after a brief stop in Florida for the limpkin. They made it to Northeast Louisiana to record the Ivory-bill. And most of what we think we know about the Ivory-bill, almost all of the photos and the only film we have of the Ivory-bill, other than modern video, which we can talk about if you want, but it comes from 1935, the Cornell expedition. And just summing up on that, his sort of historical part, the student who was along on the expedition was James Tanner. He was important because he taught at East Tennessee State and then was a longtime biology professor at UT Knoxville. And Jim Tanner was commissioned by the Audubon Society to do a survey of the Ivory-bills of the United States.
And that's how, by the way, the Bird Garden channel is connected to this story. Matt's doing all the work, but we're here in Johnson City, where East Tennessee State University is, where Jim Tanner was a teacher. Go ahead.
Right. So Jim Tanner essentially wrote the Ivory-bill Bible. So here's what happened. He was commissioned by the Audubon Society to do a survey of the existing Ivory-bills in the southeastern United States. So he went to various spots throughout the southeast. Now, he never saw Ivory-bills except in the Singer Tract near us. And the Singer Tract now is the home of Tensaw River National Wildlife Refuge. And Tensaw, despite the pronunciation, is Tensas, though it sounds like saw. And that's where we've seen and we've recorded Ivory-bills. So back historically. So the Tanner Thesis, and I'm just making this simple for your audience.
We'll keep it right there.
Yeah, for time constraints, the Tanner Thesis is that Ivory-bills were limited to virgin, meaning never cut, bottomland large tracts of hardwoods, the last of which was felled to the wartime axe in 1944 when the Singer Tract was largely cut. And the interesting thing, so since that was 44 with a lack of manpower, the people who actually cut the forests were German prisoners of war in Louisiana. Wow. So Rack, this is where we start to diverge. So the Tanner Thesis is that the Ivory-bill was limited to those virgin bottomland hardwoods, mass trend, and the corollary is they couldn't adapt, and so therefore, according to the Tanner Thesis, the Ivory-bills were doomed to extinction because of destruction of habitat, and that sort of informs one school of thought. So that thereafter, anybody who says that they've seen an Ivory-bill much after 1944 is treated as if they've seen Bigfoot or described a UFO.
Well, and what I hear there, I have a trained ear, and what I hear is we have empirical evidence. The Ivory-bill lives in virgin hardwood floor, and then we have extrapolated hypothesis. Therefore, it can't live anywhere else.
Right. Exactly.
And that went on as lore and became part of our emotional belief system until Mission Ivorybill. So go ahead.
I don't want to claim too much credit for us. In fact, everything I say, I've learned largely from others. I mean, I've been incredibly lucky because, again, I've studied the Ivory-bill for 50 years because Dr. Lowry, I wrote to him when I was 8, and he had described in Louisiana Birds that the Ivory-bill might be extinct. So I wrote to him and I said, "Dear Dr. Lowry, do you think the Ivory-billed woodpecker really is extinct?" And
that's amazing. Now, as an 8-year-old, why was this on your mind?
Oh, good question. Who knows? God, I don't know. I mean, no, but it'd be like a little kid studying tigers. If you're interested in birds, the Ivory-bill really is a very charismatic bird.
Oh, absolutely. So how did it come to you? This was pre-internet. How did you get word of the Ivory-bill?
Don't tell your young listeners, but they're books. and they still exist. Because of my great, I was just so lucky to have supportive people. A friend of ours gave us Louisiana birds, and Dr. Lowry grew up a mile from me, different times in Monroe, Louisiana. But so this is what a great man he was. So I wrote to him about that. He writes back immediately, pre-email days, and pre-computers, So he types and he says, "Dear Matthew, next time you're in Baton Rouge, come visit me at the museum and I'll show you some Ivory-bill specimens." Well, it so happened the next weekend, my father and I were going down for the annual drumming by LSU of Mississippi State in football. So we went down to an LSU game that next Saturday. And I get teary when I think about this. Dr. Lowry waded through post-game LSU football traffic to open up at 10 o'clock at night, the LSU Museum of Science to an unknown to him 8-year-old. And he let me hold Ivory-bill specimens. And so he and I were very close ever since. And this is an important point, Rack, is he said to me that which was true in 1937, which was true in 1969, and we had the conversation, and it's true in 2022, that the Ivory-bill lives in such an unusual environment that when I asked him, "Do you think the Ivory-bill is extinct?" He said, "I don't know, because there's so much area that we haven't searched." And that's still true.
Good answer.
It's relatively inaccessible. And there are no birders in there in the deep swamp woods. And our equipment is so much better now, though. So with GPS, it's difficult to get in there, but the navigational abilities are incredible. But just so sort of summing up on that with Mission Ivorybill. So as a child, I'd always been interested in the Ivory-bill, and I'm not going to bore your listeners with. There have been a few flashpoints where Ivory-bills have been credibly reported. One was 1971. Shortly after that discussion, Dr. Lowry got 2 photographs from a person we now know to be Fielding Lewis in Franklin, Louisiana, in the Atchafalaya Basin. That's the biggest freshwater swamp in the United States. And these were photos of Ivory-billed woodpeckers, no doubt. The question, so Dr. Lowry published those without identifying who took them or the location, because Fielding Lewis didn't want people, coming into there. He didn't want outsiders coming in and scaring off the birds, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was published in American Birds. The photos were accepted as proof that the Ivory-bill still existed as of 1971. And there was an article in the New York Times, saying that the Ivory-bill has been rediscovered. So that was 71. And then fast forward, there were various reports over the years. 2004 and 5 in Arkansas is another flashpoint.
Yes.
Gene Sparling is a kayaker, and he reported, I think, on a kayaking forum that he thought he'd seen an Ivory-billed woodpecker. And then a woman named Mary Scott saw that, and Mary Scott informed Tim Gallagher at Cornell, and Tim Gallagher and his friend Bobby Harrison went to Arkansas, and it's called the Big Woods, but sort of the ground zero was near Brinkley, Arkansas. And Tim Gallagher and Bobby Harrison, both of whom are excellent birders, they saw an Ivory-bill, and that brought Cornell in, and that led to a year study where in 2005, in April of 2005, the Department of Interior announced that the Ivory-billed woodpecker has been rediscovered in Arkansas, and that was a big deal. So that was that, and then in 2010. It's important to know. This might be boring, but it needs to be said.
I don't think it's boring.
Yeah, well, what I'm about to say is going to be lawyer speak, but it's very important. So the Endangered Species Act says the following: if an animal is placed on the endangered species list, the federal government has to do all it can to protect its habitat. So as to the Ivory-billed woodpecker, that would mean protecting the bottomland hardwoods in which it's found. And so another aspect of the Endangered Species Act is the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which is within the Department of Interior. Fish and Wildlife Service does a recovery plan for each of the endangered species. So in 2010, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service published its recovery plan. And here's the first, and someone who's I'm in contact with is named Chuck Hunter, William C. Hunter, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Chuck is an incredible biologist and has done great work with the Ivory-bill. And in particular, he did Appendix E as in Edward to that recovery plan in 2010, which showed all of the sightings, various sightings of Ivory-bills over the years. And Rack, the reason this is important, and this is where I become the advocate. So this is one strand of Mission Ivory-bill, is to make sure that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service does not remove Endangered Species Act protection from the Ivory-bill. So what was proposed on September 30 of 2021 was that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed that the Ivory-bill be removed from the Endangered Species Act list, quote, due to extinction. And so that's when Mission Ivory-bill, our plan had been just to launch in 2022 in February 1, our 5-year search of the southeastern United States, starting in Louisiana. And the February 1 part was that's when deer season ends in North Louisiana. But so I was dragged out of the woods and in front of my laptop with my wife Lauren's assistance. We started doing a series, and we still do this, weekly Zoom meetings on Mondays at 7 Central.
Now, I've been to one of those, very informative. Are those open to the public?
They are open to the public, and all they have to do is contact me, Matt at missionivorybill.org.
Matt at missionivorybill.org.
And
okay, and you'll get them a link, and anybody who wants to chime. And I've been there. It's very exciting to hear these people talk about their experiences with Matt Courtman and Mission Ivorybill. So I encourage you guys, if you're listening, check that out.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. Thanks for the invitation.
It's been our pleasure, and our audience has been very generous. It's taken you know, these things are actually difficult to put on Zooms, and so. But I will give you a scorecard because when they proposed to declare the Ivory-bill extinct, I paid attention because I grew up with Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'm about to say some uncharitable things about this particular event, and I find that to be totally contrary to every other dealing I've had with Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, so before you go on, Fish and Wildlife Service, not bad guys, not a bad agency.
Not a bad agency.
But they are a federal agency, and we as citizens of the United States, we have an opportunity for input that sometimes we should take advantage of.
There you go.
Now, just to reiterate, you became aware, very well aware of Ivory-billed existence or lack thereof as an 8-year-old kid. Fast forward through a law career. Now you still love the outdoors. You love birds. You've become even an advocate, your word, for the Ivory-billed woodpecker with your Mission Ivory-bill, which seeks to, I think you said, search the southeastern woods where not many birders do for 5 years. And with the announcement of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to declare the Ivory-bill extinct, this is a laser point focus that you're drawing attention to.
Thanks, Rack. You've summed it up, but let me, and the third prong of that is we want to spin out, you literally with the Ivory-bill, it's irrespective of whether Ivory-bill exists. It's such an interesting subject, and you could have subjects from literally A to Z, archaeology and anthropology through to zoology with stops at forestry, sociology. So we're also generating and doing some of our own studies. I'm working on an archaeological study, and I could go on and all those things. So those are our missions. But back to the laser focus, it's not just an academic issue about whether or not Fish and Wildlife Service declares the Ivory-bill extinct. So on our programs, we've had 5 PhDs, all of whom said the Ivory-bill should not be declared extinct. And Fish and Wildlife Service can't, as far as I know, and I stay in close contact, I can't think of any PhDs who support the proposition that the Ivory-bill should be declared extinct. But here's why I said it's not an academic question. So as I mentioned, the Ivory-bill requires large, unbroken tracts of bottomland hardwoods in which to breed and survive. So we had on Dr. Jim Tate, who was not only the former assistant director of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, right, the venerated ornithological institution in the United States. He was the science advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Interior when the previously mentioned Arkansas 2005 Ivory-bill report of the Fish and Wildlife Service that the Ivory-bill's been rediscovered. So Dr. Tate came on our show to say that he worries that what will happen if the Ivory bill is declared extinct is then Fish and Wildlife Service, because they won't have to manage the forests for the Ivory bill, since the Ivory bill is the only endangered species that, as far as we know, that requires unbroken tracts of land. Fish and Wildlife Service will be able to fragment the forest to sell off parts of the Ivory bill's habitat.
And my question to you in your Zoom, in the live stream that you did, is what is the benefit of that?
There is none to the people of the United States. Now there's a big benefit to those who covet the woods, and there would be money that goes to Fish and Wildlife Service. So, and that's the worst part. And I have to say, so there are lots of red herrings that are thrown out there that they cloak this in science, but the species, I mentioned Chuck Hunter. Chuck Hunter knows so much about Ivory bills. Chuck is not, as far as I can tell, is not involved at all in the decision to propose to declare the Ivory bill extinct. And this is another thing, Rack, that's just been so strange. It's been all propaganda. When it was reported, it said Fish and Wildlife Service declares the Ivory bill extinct, which they didn't have the legal authority to do because there has to be a public comment period. And so, honestly, after 2010, when they put out their big recovery plan, I'm not aware of any Fish and Wildlife Service searches for the Ivory bill. So they didn't survey for the bird. So then in 2018 and 2019, they started drafting the 5-year review, which their species specialist, her name is Amy Trahan, and she's in the Lafayette office. Amy and I have talked. Amy, as far as I know, has never taken an ornithology class. She's never done a 5-year review before or since. And the question of whether or not the Ivory-billed woodpecker is extinct is the most entangled question in American field biology. So this is just my opinion as an American citizen, is they hung out to dry a young biologist who doesn't have the qualifications to make this decision. It sounds like it was a political decision from political appointees above her. And so
she was set up for failure, it sounds like.
It sounds like, because let me tell you one, might be too much in the weeds, but it's important. It's an important thing to note. So as part of this 5-year status review, there has to be peer reviews. So those of you who are scientifically inclined, an article before it's published in a scientific journal has to be peer reviewed. So similarly, in a species review by Fish and Wildlife Service, they have peer reviewers. So with this 5-year status report that becomes the science for Fish and Wildlife Service seeking to declare the bird extinct, there were 4 peer reviewers, 3 of whom didn't bother to file a peer review. And the only one who did, her specialty was certainly not birds. She was with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and Amity Bass is her name. And her specialty, I think, is herpetology. At any rate, she now works for Fish and Wildlife Service. The 3 people who didn't file reviews, I'm almost certain they would have all said, don't declare the Ivory bill extinct. 2 of them are prominently, within 10 years prior to that, are prominently listed as saying they thought the Ivory bill still existed. So it is a flawed system from the beginning process, and I think it's an embarrassment. And we hope that Fish and Wildlife Service will drop the proposal.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, being that there's no direct benefit. It sounds like there's a motivation, and that's a skeptical motivation. Now, I'm aware of after the 2005. So here's what I'm hearing in your story. The Ivory bill goes extinct and then comes back, and then goes extinct and then comes back. And so it's difficult to declare a species extinct when it keeps coming back.
Right.
And I'm not sure why we want to shut the coffin on this bird. And no blanket effort has been made to search the habitat of the dang bird. Now, after the 2005, Harrison came and spoke to the TOS. I was vice president of Tennessee Ornithological Society. Wonderful to see him. And everybody left his presentation, which included a video, with the idea that at least we are hopefully skeptical that the bird is still there. No one said he's a phony, he's lying, he was wrong. No one said that. And that was as recent as 2005. The big woods happened. We appropriated emergency funds, got some property in Arkansas to preserve it. Lots of attention given to that. This was in my lifetime. This is recent history. And after that, we had a local guy, was part of a ornithologist. His name is Rick Knight, excellent ornithologist here in East Tennessee, wrote the book, The Birds of Northeast Tennessee. And he was selected by Leica to go to the Singer Track and search for the Ivory-bill. He was part of the search party. And Rick had been stationed off the coast of Louisiana on oil rigs doing biological surveys and was very accustomed.
Rack, you're going to hate me for this, but I'm going to interrupt to say I don't think he went to the Singer Track. I think he probably went to the Pearl River.
Okay.
Because that's on the coast. And the reason I say that is I'm familiar with what you're talking about. And the reason I say that is because, and I'm sorry for if this is it's not a red herring. There have been searches for the Ivory-bill. And I don't know if you're going to show the document I sent you. So
we're working up to that. But I was mentioning Rick Knight to say
go ahead.
The field trip, and those were two separate events, the coastal thing and the Singer Track. He mentioned the Singer Track, and that could be a faulty memory that they actually went to the Singer Track in Louisiana, came back negative. So the Leica conclusion was there were no Ivory-bills in the area we were at while we were there, or these expert ornithologists would have found them. Now that carried weight. That was a negative piece of evidence, but no one thought it was conclusive. No one was based on that account, ready to close the books. And I don't know why this federal agency is ready to declare an extinction when there are areas that just haven't seen humans.
Right.
I don't understand why there's a big push to that. And I don't really understand how you got so deeply involved, Matt, and thank goodness that you did. I don't think you're being paid for this. I don't think there's a big reward for you to go out there and advocate on behalf of the Ivory-bill. But wow, where would we be if this former practicing attorney didn't take up the cause of the Ivory-bill? And for whatever the motivation is, this federal agency just ran roughshod straight into declaring another species extinct. So I'm glad you're here. Doesn't require an explanation. I'm so glad that you're here. And have you given a public comment to the Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yeah, let me correct a couple quick things. One, there have been searches, but none by Fish and Wildlife Service. Since we're just going to talk about the 2010 world. So 2010 is when you would think that's when Fish and Wildlife Service would go into gear because they have their recovery plan. One of the many things you'll hear the propagandists say, and I'm sorry, there's just no way of saying it because it's not based on data. They'll say, well, if we declare the Ivory-bill extinct, that will free up funds so that we can spend it on other things. You ready? You want to know how much? So 2010 is a big year. 2011, entire 2011, here's what the United States Fish and Wildlife Service spent on the Ivory-billed woodpecker, less than we spent in our first week of searching. They spent $500, Rack, on the Ivory-billed woodpecker in 2011, which should have been the big year. And I'm not really criticizing Fish and Wildlife. I'm criticizing those who say, well, we've done extensive searches and we've spent all this money. Don't lie about it. I mean, if you want to say, you know, it's just never a good science to lie.
And it's not good government either.
Horrible government.
When you lose the trust of the people, then it's really an uphill battle to regain it. So,
and again, I love Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, I have my own theories. You can't read people's heart, but I can't find any data that supports anything other than this was a political order. And there were news reports in the Trump administration, and this isn't political other than say in the previous administration, there were reports of hires up, and that's all I'll say because I need to verify, that said we want to delist at least 30 species a year from the Endangered Species Act. And so delisting doesn't mean that they declare the bird extinct. It could be the opposite. It could say that, that the animal is doing so well that it no longer needs Endangered Species Act protection. So that's one thing. Another thing that I wanted to correct is there have been some searches, and in particular, so we'll look at a paper. Martin Lamertink is a Dutch ornithologist at Cornell and is probably the world's leading expert on woodpeckers. Marchand has done some surveys in the southeastern United States. He and Ronald Rohrbaugh, and again, we'll show those names. But nobody, they were commissioned, I think, by Fish and Wildlife Service. I know that they filed reports, but here's an analogy I'd like to offer to your audience. So let's assume we're going to make up the name of a fish. We'll call it the foxfish. And it was known and is still reported to live, but only in the Great Lakes. And so science has surveyed the southern third of Lake Michigan and not found the foxfish. You couldn't possibly declare the foxfish extinct, just as you were mentioning with your friend, Mr. Knight, who just from one survey of one swamp for a certain period of time, you couldn't say the ivory bill doesn't. Yes. So back to the foxfish, since you've only surveyed a very small portion of the Great Lakes, you can't say that the foxfish is extinct, and it is immaterial that you've never seen a foxfish in Milwaukee. They don't live in Milwaukee. They live in the lake. So the ivory bill's habitat is almost that particularized. It lives in the deep swamp woods. You're not going to have birders out there. You're not going to see it, in suburban Jackson, Mississippi. It's not where birders go.
Right. Now, I think this slide that you sent me speaks to that. Science has never yet done right by the ivory-billed woodpecker. Tell us a little bit about this clip.
Okay, so this is from Tim Gallagher, whom I mentioned before, and that comes from Tim's excellent book, The Grail Bird.
The Grail Bird.
Grail, Grail, is in the Holy Grail. So Tim's important to our story because he's affiliated with Cornell, and he and Bobby Harrison, the Harrison you were referring to, they became aware of this Arkansas report of an ivory bill in 2004, and so Bobby and Tim went to see if they could see the bird, and they did, and they both independently drew what they'd seen. And John Fitzpatrick, who's a hero in our book, John Fitzpatrick was the Cornell, recently retired. He's the director emeritus of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So cool. John Fitzpatrick describes Tim Gallagher coming into his office kind of ashen, and Director Fitzpatrick thinks, oh my God, Tim's resigning, or Tim's in ill health or what. And Tim then relates what I've just said, that he and Bobby Harrison, two very competent birders, had in fact seen the ivory bill that had been reported in Arkansas. So this comes from Tim's book. And Tim outlines this very well, that science has never done right by the ivory-billed woodpecker. That's another thing we're seeking to correct with Mission Ivorybill. And let me tell you why we're well positioned to do that. The last ornithology class I took was in 1969 when I was 8, as mentioned previously. So I'm not a scientist, but because Mission Ivorybill stands alone, we don't have to answer to any other constituencies. Mm-hmm. So in universities, when you have a professor, there are no professors who actually search for the ivory bill who think it should be declared extinct. It might sound like a subtle distinction. There are two different propositions. One is the ivory bill extinct? That's one proposition. The other is, can we declare the ivory bill extinct? So I'm really right now only talking about that second thing. Can we declare the ivory bill extinct? And the answer to that is no, because we haven't done enough surveys. Now, I'm one of the people who've seen ivory bills and audio recorded them. So I'm here to testify that the ivory bill isn't extinct. But I'm aware that that's not going to move many. It moves some people, right? And, I'm willing to take a lie detector.
Now, and Matt, you're on the record now. You claim to have seen and heard an ivory-billed woodpecker recently.
Right. But let me tell you this. We have a slide that says, that's maybe mean. I won't say it. But it's not just a matter of an ivory bill existing. It's an ivory bill existing in a place that's going to be seen by a person who knows what it is, who will then report it to the authorities, who will then believe him or her. So there's so many factors that go into that. And so one of the places it falls off, and this is why I wear camo we have a community outreach group, which is called the Louisiana Wilds, and our colors are hunter orange and hunter green, because hunters, it's a broader program. We want to engage people in wildlife studies in Louisiana. But hunters are the most important group for the ivory bill survival for a couple reasons. One is we wouldn't have our public lands, at least in Louisiana and I suspect elsewhere, were it not for the hunters, because it's the hunting licenses which pay for the public lands, and it's the political pressure exerted by hunters to keep those lands public. So that's what we love. We ought to have. I know Pennsylvania has this a Hug a Hunter Day, and so we're pro hunters in that. The other thing is
pro hunter. I heard it loud and clear. Pro hunter.
Yeah, pro hunter. Yes. Pro hunter and pro hunting rights and pro landowner rights. And so
I don't understand why anyone would consider there's a conflict there between nature lovers, bird watchers, and hunters. I don't.
Man, you're really preaching to the choir there. So one of my heroes is E.A. Edward Avery McElhenney. Your audience might know the McElhenney name because they're the people.
I do.
Tabasco, right? So Avery Island. So E.A. McElhenney, the Tabasco Company was founded by Edmund McElhenney shortly after the Civil War. And then his son, E.A. McElhenney, as the president who succeeded him, did a great job and made Tabasco an international brand. He's important to our story because he was quite the biologist and conservationist in his own right. When I see the Bird Garden channel, he's almost single-handedly saved the snowy egret from extinction through jungle gardens on Ivory Island, which is on the Louisiana coast, just south of Lafayette and New Iberia. So E.A. McElhenney, he's one of my heroes because the Singer Tract wouldn't have been set aside as a preserve were it not for E.A. McElhenney, who in the early 20s, but I think 1921, he and a few other influential Louisianians, realizing the importance of that great forest, which was considered the forest primeval. And in 1907, Teddy Roosevelt wrote of a bear hunt from there. He wrote In the Louisiana Canebrakes, and it's just fun history. The person that brought him there was E.A. McElhenney's brother, John, who was a Rough Rider. So John, they were big bear hunters. So John McElhenney invited the president to come down to the Singer Tract to hunt bears. And but Teddy Roosevelt, and I encourage your audience to look this up, you can find it online, In the Louisiana Canebrakes. And he describes as the highlight of the trip was he saw 3 ivory-billed woodpeckers.
Wow.
But back to E.A. McElhenney in the relationship between hunting and conservation, I've gotten to be friends with his great-granddaughter, and we were talking about what you just said. It's a false dichotomy of, responsible hunters, which are 99% of them, are conservationists. So when I asked his great-granddaughter, what did E.A. McElhenney say about this? She said, because he was a big hunter, he said he is a conservationist, so his grandchildren will have something to hunt. So if you think, again, and I'm too soft-hearted to kill anything. The last thing bird I killed was I harvested the only winter specimen in Louisiana of a summer tanager with a BB gun outside my boyhood bedroom with a BB gun. I think it must have died from a heart attack, but I was so guilt stricken. It was the last thing I killed. So while I'm personally not a hunter, I very, very much respect hunters.
Well, I'm not a hunter either. And I always mentioned to the Bird Garden viewers and subscribers, listen, as a bird watcher, if you're not there yet, if you're just feeding the birds because you love them and they make your life better, they're going to draw you into bird watching. And sometimes when you're out there with bird watchers, you'll see binoculars with a duck stamp hanging off of them. These aren't duck hunters. These are bird watchers supporting the duck stamp by buying a duck stamp, displaying it, saying, hey, I'm preserving land for responsible hunters, but also for the wildlife that I love. So there's actually a marriage there if you're not aware of it.
Exactly. I'm so glad that we got onto that, because that's something we're trying to promote. And specifically, so back to, does the Ivory Bill exist? Yeah. It does, but are hunters going to report it? And the answer is a lot of them are worried, rightfully so, that there might be encroachments into either their hunting rights or their land ownership rights. So we're looking to create legislation which already exists for the red cockaded woodpecker. Your audience might be familiar with it. It's a woodpecker that's endangered, and it's a pine wood specialist. So the red cockaded Safe Harbor Act says the following, that if a landowner has red cockaded woodpeckers on his or her property, the government won't encroach or infringe on their ownership rights if they take some actions to promote the red-cockaded woodpecker's habitat. And I don't know what those are specifically. So we would love to get something in line for the Ivory Bill. And that's, again, one of our cultural outreaches, particularly in Louisiana. But it's not Louisiana's bird, but there's a long history of connection. And you mentioned the TOS, the Tennessee Ornithological Society. The Louisiana Ornithological Society, our emblem is the Ivory-billed woodpecker. So it's been very frustrating to me. The LOS is, you said public comments. The lawyer in me asked for public hearing for Fish and Wildlife Service, which would trigger a second round of public comments. And the lawyer in me just wanted to make sure the administrative record had been made, been fully made in case we have to litigate. And just, again, maybe boring your listeners, but the standard, people are shocked when you say, what, you would sue the Fish and Wildlife Service? It's been done frequently and with lots of success, only along the following lines. So as to Endangered Species Act actions, Fish and Wildlife Service is under the following obligation. Whatever they conclude has to be based on the best scientific, best available scientific and or commercial data. So that's one thing. And then the standard of judgment regarding it is whatever their actions are would be arbitrary and capricious. So I think the document that we're looking at, it might be worth talking about. This conclusion in the bottom of that shows that if they were to declare the Ivory Bill extinct, it would be arbitrary and capricious, and not only not based on the best available science, it would be contrary to the best available science. It might, do you have the blow up of that? Because that's an important issue. So this was the end of the 2016 technical report to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. And again, I'm saying this, and this is just speculation. I'm willing to be wrong about this. My understanding is that Fish and Wildlife Service has to publish everything that is cited by them in support of their decision to take a particular action. In this case, proposing that the Ivory Bill declared extinct. I couldn't find this anyplace online, but Amy Traha, the species specialist, the one who did the review, she and I, we've talked cordially, and I've told her, look, this is nothing personal. I just know what I know, and the Ivory Bill shouldn't be declared extinct, and it might go extinct if it's declared extinct. Anyway, so I knew the existence of this document, so I asked her to email it to me, and sure enough, she did. And so it's worth reading this. So this is very important because initially this was what we're looking at is a poster from a paper that was presented in Brazil in 2004 or 5. In 2010, my wife off screen told me. So it was presented in 2000. It was presented at some previous point. And the authors were William C. Chuck Hunter, who is with Fish and Wildlife Service, and then 3 Cornell-affiliated ornithologists, Marcin Lamertink, whom I mentioned, Ronald Rohrbaugh, whom I mentioned, and then Ken Rosenberg, all eminent ornithologists. So that was its first iteration. But I mentioned there have been some woodpecker Ivory Bill surveys, and that was led by Marcin Lamertink and Ronald Rohrbaugh, and they did that for Fish and Wildlife Service. And here's what they concluded. After large-scale effort for Ivory Bill woodpeckers, the absence of solid sightings post-2005 is disappointing. Table 1 demonstrates that in the Arkansas Big Woods, only a very small number of home ranges may have escaped detection, and hence probably no population exists there. And that's referencing the Arkansas Big Woods,
right?
Brinkley, Arkansas. The one bird recorded there in 2004 and 5 may have moved or died. Ivory bills were never static. In the Pascagoula and the Mississippi, South Mississippi, in the Pascagoula and South Florida search areas, small populations could have remained undetected despite considerable search effort. And here we go. Other areas are less searched than these examples or have not been searched. Extensive areas of apparently suitable and improving habitat for the species exist in the United States. Plausible reports of Ivory-billed woodpecker should be followed up swiftly and thoroughly, which is what we're doing with Mission Ivorybill. And here's the conclusion that if we go to court, we're going to win on. It is premature to declare the ivory-billed woodpecker extinct. So again, that goes to the first issue: is can we declare the ivory bill extinct? And the answer is no, because we have adequately surveyed for it. That's a separate proposition from have I and others proved that the ivory bill exists. And also, just so we're clear, I'm certainly, while we've spearheaded the effort to fight Fish and Wildlife Service, there are many people who are involved, but we've been a really good lightning rod for bringing it to the public. And again, I'm always reaching out. I got strafed in the public comments by John Dillon, who's the president of the Louisiana Ornithological Society. I commend it just for its hate speech. He says of me, he said of me that he wouldn't name my name out of courtesy. And then he goes on to say, I'm a charlatan and I'm reporting, and I've said that I've seen the ivory bill. And here's John's real, and I love John. We just disagree on this. I don't know why it makes people so. On the other side, the people who are just certain the ivory bill is extinct, I have to tell you, they seem totally irrational and hostile to those of us who know that it's not. Again, but anyhow, but just summing up on what John put in there, he said that, and it's so dirty pool. So I, being a very affable guy and having no claim to the ivory bill, right? Our goal with Mission Ivorybill is just, we want to raise everybody's boats. And I've been blessed to have seen it a few times now and heard it a few times. So if I never see it again, I'll die a happy man. So, I mean, I'd be thrilled if there were a 16-year-old girl who listens to one of our programs and she goes on to get her PhD, and then she's the person who leads the Ivory Bill effort in 2052. Yeah, that's my greatest hope. So that's what I mean about we have.
Well, let me ask you this, Matt: is eBird holding your report of an Ivory-billed woodpecker for review?
It's so funny you mentioned that. I'm just saying this because I don't know how much of your audience knows. So eBird is a system, and it's a great system that Cornell curates, and you report what you've seen. So here's what was really funny. So we had John Fitzpatrick on our program, one of the...
By the way, the same Fitzpatrick you mentioned before as you were describing the importance of the decision makers in this Ivory-billed woodpecker future was on your live stream and participated. And it was great to see John there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and Fitz and I have talked a few times, and he's a great man. So I got to gig him on this. I said, so Fitz, you know that the 2005 Arkansas report is not on eBird. Again, this is administrated by Cornell, right? And so John Fitzpatrick was the longtime director. I said, what's up with that? And he said, without blinking an eye, he said, well, I guess the editors didn't think the evidence was good enough. So I say that to my fellow searchers who get upset when people don't accept our word for it, or they don't think our recordings, or they don't think videos show the ivory bill. I cite John Fitzpatrick, and I say there is no more eminent scientist than John Fitzpatrick, and there's no more eminent ornithological institution than the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And if people don't take Fitz's word for it, I don't lose any sleep if somebody doesn't think we found it. But I do have to say this, that the other side argues there's a rhetorical device called argument from authority. And the rhetoric in it is there's actually no authority behind it. So when they say, well, scientists have looked at this, and then you break it down, who are the scientists? The highest award that you can win in ornithology is the Brewster Medal. We've had 2 Brewster Medal winning ornithologists just on our program. And both of them said the ivory bill shouldn't be declared extinct. That's John Fitzpatrick. And then Jeff Hill at Auburn. And Jeff himself has seen ivory bills in northern Florida in early 2005, maybe early 2006. Anyhow, the point of the story is, again, there are no Brewster Medal winners who are on the side who think the ivory bill should be declared extinct. And back to Louisiana, and for me, just the craziness of the issue, the hostility of the current leadership of the Louisiana Ornithological Society. So it's led by a high school, a great high school English teacher, John Dillon, who I'm not putting John down. He really is a great teacher, and he's done great jobs for wildlife and getting his high school students interested in wildlife. So I have nothing but praise for John, but he's he's rabid in thinking that science is all on the side that the Ivory Bill should be declared extinct. So within Louisiana, before we talked, we mentioned Van Rimpson.
Yes.
So Van is the most accomplished ornithologist in the state of Louisiana, who is a Brewster Medal winner, right? And so he's at LSU. He's recently retired as the director of LSU Museum of Natural Science. So Van was a co-author of the 2005 article announcing the rediscovery of the Ivory-billed woodpecker. So it is confounding to me that the Louisiana Ornithological Society totally ignores the opinion of our own Brewster Medal winner Van Rimpson in favor of its current president, who's
again there I smell a motivation that's a little off. I don't know. I can't say. I don't know. But the reason I wanted to have you on the Bird Talk show, Matt, is to talk about the importance of keeping the idea of the Ivory-billed woodpecker alive. You've done a great job. I know that beliefs become actions, and actions have consequences. So it doesn't matter what we believe, and we decide what we're going to believe based on information that we gather. You have done an outstanding job of raising our awareness of the situation, regardless of our belief on the bird. I think you've given lots of weight on the side that I know this bird. You say, I know this bird is still with us, and it's okay if you think that way too. I don't think anyone could be deemed crazy for thinking the Ivory-billed woodpecker is still out there, when just the simple fact we haven't looked everywhere for it. And then we get into the other evidence. I've seen it. I've heard it repeated. This time, that time, the next time. Now this live guest says, I've seen and heard the Ivory-billed woodpecker. I can't stand by and let it be declared extinct, knowing that decision will have consequences for not only the bird, but the habitat that supports the bird now and everything that depends on it.
Yes, thank you.
So with all of that said, Matt, tell us how we can stay in touch with you and support your effort there at Mission Ivorybill.
Thank you so much, Rack. I really appreciate it. And that's a good summary. And to the other side of that is it saddens me just briefly that we can't engage everybody in this. We love skeptics, right? Even after I'd audio recorded the Ivory Bills in 2017, it wasn't until I saw the Ivory Bills in 2019 that I knew that my brain accepted the Ivory Bills exist. So we love skeptics, and they keep us on. I'm skeptical, right? So, but to support us, just missionivorybill.org is our website, which we'll have up within a week. But in the meantime, find us on Facebook, Mission Ivorybill. And please email me, matt@missionivorybill.org. And we'd be happy to sign you up for our free Zooms. So thank you so much.
I'll put some of that information in the description of this video too.
Great.
So people can reach out to you that way. And are you considering, this is just cold, are you considering a YouTube channel?
We have a YouTube channel, Mission Ivorybill. So we've done 23 of our Zooms, and we've posted maybe 5 or 6. We're going to get better about that.
I'll link that.
Great.
And the index cards above and below, so
Thank
people can get caught up on all of those. I was a participant in one of those, and I'm telling you, they're worth your time. If you have an inkling of interest in birds or just nature, how our federal government operates its natural preserves. Yeah. Matt's a great resource for that, and I'm going to link all over the place to get you connected to that.
Thank you
and
so
I
much.
feel like, Matt, we've only scratched the surface. Would you consider coming back and being a guest on the Bird Talk show again?
Absolutely. I'll tease it by saying we have recordings, but we're almost sure are Ivory-billed double knocks and single knocks from February 12 of 2022.
That will be the top of the subject the next time we hear. What is a double knock, and can you describe what it sounds like? It sounds like maybe you can.
Oh, sure. It's so remember the Ivory-bill, though it looks like the pileated, it's unique among American birds in woodpeckers in that it's drum, right?
Yes.
Woodpeckers communicate both by vocalizations and then by drumming. The Ivory-bill in all Campephalus species, right, that genus, it doesn't have a lot of drums. It's either a double knock, which is wham wham, or a single knock, which is just wham. And it's incredibly loud, and it's unlike any other sound in the forest. So,
well, I'm going to let you have the last word there, man. If you'll hang around, I'll come back there in the green room and talk to you before you leave. And I'm going to close this out here. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on the Bird Talk Show today. It has been amazing to hear Matt Courtman describe what is going on with the ivory-billed woodpecker, the Lord God bird. Is it here? Is it not here? We've changed our opinion so many times as people who care about which birds are amongst us and which aren't. We've got so many authors taking so many different positions. There's political pressure. There's independent arguments. It's an exciting topic. And I think we went to the very tip top, the mountaintop experience, having Matt Courtman here to describe his experience, his lifelong affiliation, Pileated Woodpecker. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And I can't wait to get Matt back in here to continue this conversation. If you like this interview with Matt, show him some appreciation. Hit that thumbs up. If you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I promise to keep you updated and informed via the community tab. If you'll go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment below with a question, any question that pops up in this video, I'm going to pass along to Matt, and we'll have something to discuss in future episodes of the Bird Talk Show. That's going to do it for this one. Until the next time, why don't you get out there and see some birds?